At 28,251 feet, or 8,611 meters, K2 is the second highest mountain on Earth, but if you ask anyone who knows anything about mountains, K2 is the true king of the 8,000-meter peaks. The little bit that it lacks in height is more than made up for in every other respect that makes a mountain difficult and dangerous. The slopes are steeper, the weather is worse, and the climbing is more technical. It's for this reason that despite having less than a tenth of the ascents of Everest, K2 has more than a third of the deaths. So, in this video, we're going to look at why K2 is considered one of the most difficult and dangerous mountains on Earth, and the impossible first attempts to conquer it. Today's video is sponsored by Babel, one of the top language learning apps in the world. If you've been following my channel long enough, you probably know I'm Canadian, and because of this, I took French in school for many, many years. Around a year ago, when Babel first reached out to me, and after years of being out of school, I could barely put together a single sentence anymore because of how out of practice I was. This was honestly a bit of a bummer because of how much time and effort it took to learn French in the first place. This is why I've been thrilled to work with Babel over the past little while. Their lessons are all designed by real language teachers. This means you go through a variety of different ways to learn the same concepts, like matching words with definitions, spelling words out, using the correct grammar, and even practicing your pronunciation with Babel's speech recognition, just like this. So not only does it really accelerate your learning and enable you to have real-world conversations, but it's actually a fun way to learn, which obviously just makes it that much easier to go through the lessons. And the best part about this is that when I'm away from my computer, I can do all the lessons from the Babel app on my phone. So, I'm curious to hear what languages all of you would want to learn, because right now, Babel is offering 60% off a subscription for all scary, interesting viewers. And this comes with a 20-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in giving it a try with the link in the description below. Despite being almost 1,000 feet lower than Mount Everest, K2 is unanimously known for being a far greater challenge. It's often even called the most difficult or most dangerous mountain on Earth. But in reality, definitively calling one mountain the most difficult is a tricky thing to quantify. There are a variety of factors that can be used to justify this ranking, like how remote the mountain is, how steep the routes are, how technical the climbing is, how much vertical distance there is to be traveled, or even how much of the climb is above the death zone, and the list goes on and on. And, obviously, every mountain varies in its ranking in each of these categories, so then it becomes a question of how you average that out and how much weight you assign to each category, which doesn't really help to clarify the issue either. So, another way to look at this is to take the number of successful ascents and compare it to the number of people who have died trying. Using these figures, there are 3 mountains among the 14 8,000-meter peaks that seem to be more dangerous than the rest. Again, looking solely at this metric. In third is Nanga Parbat, with a death-to-ascent rate of roughly 20%. Second is K2, with a death-to-ascent rate of roughly 26%. And first is Annapurna 1, with a death-to-ascent rate of 32%. If we focus only on this metric, it seems fairly cut and dry that Annapurna is the most dangerous, but taking a closer look, there's still more to the story. First is that Annapurna is by far the least ascended, at close to a third less than any of the other 8,000-meter peaks. You would expect that as more people attempt a mountain, the route and technique to climb it are refined, increasing the likelihood of success and decreasing the likelihood of catastrophic failure. It's possible Annapurna simply hasn't been climbed enough for those numbers to reflect its true difficulty, and those numbers are currently inflated as a result. In support of this idea is the fact that between 2012 and 2022, the rate of deaths to ascents on Annapurna fell below that of K2. It's likely that these numbers will continue to shift around even further as each route is practiced and eventually mastered. And finally, complicating things even further, even the mountains themselves are not the same year to year. There are years when the weather is worse, or the routes are worse with more snow and ice, which further changes the difficulty on a yearly basis. All of this is to say that it might be impossible to definitively say which mountain is the most dangerous or the most difficult. The best we can really do is say that on average, K2 seems to be close to the top, and many of the world's best climbers share this sentiment. So, putting the rankings aside, here's what we know for sure about K2 that has given it such a fearsome reputation. K2 is the second highest mountain, meaning that the amount of death zone climbers need to travel through is second only to Everest. K2 is also remote. There are few towns or roads nearby, so getting to the base is a challenge all on its own, let alone with tons of gear. It's also the farthest north of any of the 8,000-meter peaks, meaning it's colder and the weather is worse. It's also known for being unrelentingly steep, with any route up averaging 45 degrees from the base all the way to the summit. It also has an increased risk of avalanches and rock falls. Apparently on Everest, it's common not to wear your helmet most of the time. On K2, it's the exact opposite. From the moment you're at the base, your helmet is on, and on permanently. Camping is also worse on K2 because there are far fewer flat open areas to even place tents. As you ascend higher, this only gets worse, and it's not uncommon for tents to be partially hanging over an edge. And while you're in your tent, you're still often at risk of rock falls from above. The routes themselves are also narrower, sometimes just wide enough for a footpath, often on slippery rock and ice. In the event that something does go wrong, this makes rescues a nightmare. There is barely enough room to walk, let alone carry someone down. And the final piece to illustrate all of this in combination is that sometimes years go by with no successful ascents. This is in contrast to Everest, where there are hundreds of ascents yearly. Sometimes on K2 there are only deaths. And, this was especially true in the early attempts. The Great Trigonometrical Survey was a project undertaken at the beginning of the 1800s to survey the entire Indian subcontinent with scientific precision. By the middle of the 19th century, it reached Karakoram, which is the mountain range that K2 is a part of. In 1856, the two most prominent peaks in the area were sketched and given the names Karakoram 1 and Karakoram 2, or K1 and K2. If you remember from the Mount Everest video, unlike other colonial pursuits, local names were used for mountains whenever possible. Because K2 is so remote, there were no towns or even trade routes that got close enough to see it, at least from the Indian side. Because of this, it was never given a name by the local populace, so the original survey name, K2, stuck. For decades afterward, as mountaineering was developing in Europe, there were no attempts or even expeditions in the area. Toward the end of the century though, attention slowly shifted to the so-called roof of the world, where all of the 8,000-meter peaks were still unclimbed. The first expedition to even attempt to get close to the K2 was in 1892, when a British explorer led a group to a point now known as Concordia, which is about 8 hours from the base. This was, at the time, the closest anyone had ever come to the mountain, at least that we know of. Then, in 1902, close to 50 years after it was first surveyed, the first true attempt was made to reach the summit. This was an international expedition which approached from the north side in China and ascended the northeast ridge to a height of 21,400 feet, or 6,525 meters. On this first attempt, the true logistical nightmare it is to even reach K2 was realized.